Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. And thanks for tuning in. This morning we'll conclude the record of this so-called monophyllite controversy in John Dowling's book, The History of Romanism. I hope my listeners have learned from this, as I have. What we see in all of this is just an open mockery. This is the very hand of God exposing the papacy and his counterpart in Constantinople and even the Roman emperors as not servants of the true God, obviously. And properly speaking, the papacy demonstrates to the world that it is the Antichrist. Okay, so that none of us would be deceived. All of this historical record is for our merciful benefit, direct from the hand of Almighty God in the developments in this monophyllite controversy. And we're not to take any of this seriously, especially not the papacy. And what does this say for the Christian churches today who are seeking to ecumenically reunite with the Roman Catholic Church? It's just, while words are not sufficient to describe, to characterize the great falling away as it exists today. All right. Yesterday we concluded with our account of the new Pope Martin, who was quickly approved by the emperor to take the seat of the Holy Roman Pontiff. And Martin, immediately, as we might expect of the papacy, challenged the authority of the king, of the emperor. First of all, he condemned the monophyllite doctrine. He condemned the ekthesis that supported it. And he also condemned the emperor's production called the type, and he angered the emperor. This was a case of the new Pope Martin trying to assert his supremacy and authority over the empire, over the emperor. And as a reward, the emperor, the King of Kings, defrocked Martin, stripped him of his vestments, stripped him of his power and his authority, and sent him off to a Grecian archipelago to rot. Okay? And that's where he died in the year 656 A.D. So the emperor is still supreme over the popes at this time, despite the fact that the papacy continually tried to challenge the authority of the emperors and to become King of Kings. That has not yet, at this reading, been achieved, but nonetheless, history records that throughout, at least until this period of time, 656 A.D., the emperors ruled over the popes. All right. Now we'll begin subsection 24 on page 150 if you're following along. He says, these resolute proceedings rendered the successors of Martin, Eugenius and Vitalianus, more moderate and prudent than their predecessor had been, especially the latter, Vitalianus, who received Constans upon his arrival at Rome, that's the emperor Constans, upon his arrival in Rome in the year 663, with the highest marks of distinction and respect, and used the wisest precautions to prevent the flame of that unhappy controversy, that is the monophyllite controversy, from breaking out a second time. And thus for several years it appeared to be extinguished. But it was so only in appearance. It was a lurking flame which spread itself secretly and gave reason to those who examined things with attention to dread new combustions both in church and state. Okay? Rome's never going to give up her quest to become King of Kings. As history records, the papacy now rules and reigns over the kings of the earth. All right? No emperor, not even the world court, can hold a trial, to hold the papacy on trial. I've given the example of this global pedophile priest pandemic, and how the world tried to bring the papacy, that is Pope Benedict XVI, rather Antichrist Pope Benedict XVI, to trial, because he oversaw most of the latter stages, the most current stages of this pedophile priest pandemic, and he tried to hide the evidence and protect these pedophile priests. And so charges were brought against him in the World Court. And there was silence from the World Court for so long until they finally pressed the question, why will you not bring the Pope to trial? And the World Court plainly said what Roman Catholic canon law states: we have no jurisdiction over the papacy. Okay? So the papacy has demonstrated that it is King of Kings, and no civil court, no civil authority has any authority whatsoever over the popes and all of their crimes. So we see with our own eyes the King of Kings status that the papacy enjoys in the world today. And that's just one example. But at this time, the emperor still had authority over the popes, and he took Martin off his throne, defrocked him, and put him on an island to rot. And the succeeding popes immediately after Martin were very, very careful how they treated the emperor at that period of time, but only for outward appearances. Only for outward appearances. Now he says, to prevent these, Constans Pagonitus, the son of Constans, pursuant to the advice of Agatho, the Roman pontiff, summoned in the year 680 the Sixth General or Ecumenical Council, in which he permitted the Monothelites and Pope Honorius himself to be solemnly condemned in presence of the Roman legates, who represented Agatho in that assembly, and confirmed the sentence pronounced by the council by the sanction of penal laws enacted against such as pretended to oppose it. Okay, so taking official action against this monothelite doctrine and all who held it. All right? They're damning and condemning the monothelite thesis and all who supported it. In subsection 25 on the same page, 151, it says, the condemnation of Pope Honorius for heresy by this General Council is an event of so much importance in the controversy with Rome that we deem it worthy to place on record the language in which the decrees of his condemnation, and that of others who also maintained the same doctrine was couched. Okay, so we're going to hear the very words of this decision by the General Council. It says, the writings on this subject have been read before the council from the pens of Sergius, former Patriarch of Constantinople, Cyrus of Phasis, and Honorius, former Pope of Old Rome. They solemnly delivered their unanimous judgment in the following terms. Okay, here's the very language from this decision. Quote, having examined the dogmatic letters that were written by Sergius, formerly bishop of this royal city, that is Constantinople, to Cyrus, once of Phasis, and to Honorius, bishop of Old Rome, and likewise the answer of the said Honorius to the letter of Sergius, we have found them quite repugnant to the doctrine of the apostles, to the definitions of the councils, to the sense of the fathers, and entirely agreeable to the false doctrines of the heretics. Therefore, we reject and accurse them as hurtful to the soul. As we reject and accurse such impious dogmas, so we are all of opinion that the names of those who taught and professed them ought to be banished from the church, that is, struck out of the dipsticks, the diptychs, viz., the names of Sergius, former bishop of this royal city, Constantinople, who first wrote of this impious tenet, and Cyrus of Alexandria, of Pyrrhus, Paul, and Peter, who once held this see, and agreed in opinion with them, and likewise of Theodorus, formerly Bishop of Theron, who have all been mentioned by the thrice blessed Agatho, Pope Agatho, in his letter to our most pious Lord and mighty Emperor, and have been anathematized by him as holding opinions repugnant to the true faith. All these, and each of them, we too declare anathematized, and with them we anathematize and cast out of the Holy Catholic Church, listen to this, Honorius, Pope of Old Rome, it appearing from his letter to Sergius that he entirely agreed in opinion with him and confirmed his impious doctrine, unquote. So that's the language, and this Vatican Council condemned Antichrist Pope Honorius as a heretic. So one of the popes, thank God for his mercy, has proven that the infallibility claimed by the papacy is a farce, and that the papacy's own council condemned Pope Honorius as a heretic. All right? Now, this is very amusing until you comprehend the mercy that is being extended to us from God Almighty in all of these proceedings. It says, in the same session of the council, the second letter of Pope Honorius to Sergius was read, examined, and by a decree of the council committed to the flames with other monothelite writings, and it is worthy of remark that this decree passed unanimously without the slightest opposition, not even the legates of the Pope venturing to say a word in his behalf. So overwhelming and conclusive was the proof that Pope Honorius had held and maintained the very same doctrine as was now by this council acknowledged even by the Romanists as the Sixth General Council solemnly condemned as heresy. So, I want you to see God's hand in this. He forced, through this monothelite controversy, he forced the exposition or the exposing of the papacy as heretical even by its own council. Okay? By their own words, they will condemn themselves. All right? Out of their own mouths. Now, despite this record of history, which cannot be denied, the papacy still maintains its divine and infallible status. And this is the power that they hold over the kings of the earth. This is how they coerce the kings of the earth to be servants of the Pope, because the Pope claims and convinces them that he is divine and infallible. He is, as it were, the voice of God on the earth, and they dare not oppose him. And this is how they become vassals of the Pope, despite this merciful record of history where the Roman Catholic Church and a general council officially deemed one of their popes a heretic. So we take the lesson from this that God has solemnly debunked the idea or the very notion that the Pope is anything but Satan's vicar on the earth. He's not God's vicar at all. He says, from the above account of this famous controversy, the monothelite controversy, much light is thrown upon the condition, the character, and the claims of popery during the 7th century. Here are the vital conclusions that the author makes. Number one, we learn that the popes of Rome were careful to seize every opportunity of advancing their own authority and practically asserting that supremacy as the spiritual sovereigns of the Church, which they had claimed ever since the decree of Emperor Phocas in 606 A.D. We hear them thundering their anathemas at the heads of the other bishops and excommunicating even the patriarchs of Constantinople, the most exalted in rank of all the dignitaries of the Church in this century, if we accept, that is, exclude the Pope himself. In the decree of Pope Martin against the edict called the Type, remember, which was written by the emperor, we have seen that Paul is called, quote, the pretended bishop of Constantinople, unquote, because he had been excommunicated and deposed by the authority of Pope Theodore, the predecessor of Martin. Okay, so the Pope is demonstrating his pretended authority over even the Patriarch of Constantinople. In the letter which Pope Agathos sent to the emperor by the hands of his legates to the council, we discover the first sentence of its claim, which has since been frequently asserted, the claim of absolute papal authority. After a long descant in praise of the See of St. Peter, he affirmed that the popes never had erred and intimated that they never could err, and that their decisions ought therefore to be received as the divine voice of St. Peter himself. My apologies. Okay, so here's the papacy proclaiming divinity and infallibility. And he says, we have already seen, however, that the council, in the case of Pope Honorius, very soon came to an entirely different decision. What is that? That the papacy is not divine, nor is it infallible. The only thing this council lacked was the courage to say what I say and what all Protestants throughout history, even back into the first century Christians, that power which replaces the Caesars is the head of the great apostasy. He is the Antichrist proper of the Scriptures. He has no authority whatsoever from God. No man of any rank or station in the world should pay heed to him. And any king of the earth that pays homage to this pretended Christ in Rome is a heretic and is not worthy to command his own house, much less the entire nation. Now, I've said it. And that's the conclusion that we should draw from all of this. He says, we have already seen, however, that the council, in the case of Pope Honorius, very soon came to an entirely different decision. Number 2, we learn also that notwithstanding these lofty assumptions, the authority of the Pope was as yet by no means universally received, nor his decrees regarded as binding, especially in the East, Constantinople. And in proof of this, we need only recur to the fact that Paul and Pyrrhus both exercised the office of Patriarch and were for years acknowledged and regarded as such by the emperor, the bishops, and the people of the East, notwithstanding each of them had been solemnly excommunicated by the Pope. So, the Pope's word didn't have any sway, even in the East. Okay? The Pope excommunicated them, but they still continued to exercise their office as Patriarch. Number 3, we see also that the popes had not yet learned to hurl their anathemas, their thunders, at the heads of the emperors and the kings. This election of a pope at this time was not regarded as valid till confirmed by the decree of the emperor. In other words, no pope could take his throne, no pope could ascend to the throne of the papacy unless a prior approval from the emperor was given. Okay? If the Roman Catholic Church elected a pope, he was only pope unless and until the emperor affirmed him. Then he could ascend to the chair. And it says, hence we are not surprised that the popes were too timid and too prudent to include the most serene emperor Heraclius and Constans in the same sentence of excommunication which they pronounced against Paul and Pyrrhus for merely executing the orders of their imperial masters in preparing and publishing the obnoxious heretical decrees, the ekthesis, or the type. The age of Theodore and Martin was not the age of Pope Gregory VII or of Innocent III. Okay? Pope Gregory VII and Innocent III ascended to King of Kings status. But prior to this age, in the age of Pope Theodore and Martin, they had not yet achieved supremacy over the emperor. And we can obviously conclude, and this is a point that the author is insinuating, that this office of papacy was not divinely granted to the popes. If Christ had left the world the papacy as his vicar or his replacement on earth, he would have immediately ascended to authority over the emperors. But the papacy at first was nothing but a bishop among bishops, an equal of all the bishops, never superior over any. And the papacy dug and clawed until he became known as the Bishop of Bishops, plotting and scheming with all kinds of intrigue, including murder, war, crusade, and everything else, to ascend above the heights of the clouds. All right? To ascend above the stars of God. And that is to become King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Listen, I've said it before on Inquisition Update. History leaves no room for doubt that the papacy is the human agency through which Satan, or Lucifer as he is regarded in Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 15, the papacy is the human agency through which Lucifer, Satan, attempts to fulfill his self-fulfilling prophecy in Isaiah chapter 14, where he was ascend above the heights of the clouds to become like the Most High. Okay, you getting the message? There's nothing Christian about the papacy. It's all satanic from the very beginning. It's not of God. It's against God. It seeks to replace God on the earth. It's Satan trying to usurp his King of Kings and Lord of Lords status over Christ's heritage. You and me, the ones for whom Christ bled and died to redeem us. And God does not want us to be ignorant about who this false Christ is. And that's why all of this history is recorded for our benefit, the mercy of Almighty God extended to us so that none of us would be deceived. I've made this point over and over. I hope it doesn't seem monotonous. But if we don't comprehend the mercy of God in all of this, we've lost. Point number 4. It is scarcely necessary to add that in the unanimous condemnation of Pope Honorius by the Sixth General Council for heresy, we have a complete refutation of the claim so frequently urged by the Jesuits and other advocates of Rome of the infallibility of the Pope. Okay? This is the very thing that God, through all of this, proved. That the papacy is not divine, nor is it infallible. It is the son of perdition. And it is the papacy, the battle axe of the papacy, the Jesuits, who continue to maintain the deity and the infallibility of the papacy and are head of the Counter-Reformation to destroy the Protestant Reformation and to reassert the infallibility and the deity of the papacy over all of mankind. And we're not unwise to their methods and their means. He said it is scarcely necessary to add that in the unanimous condemnation of Pope Honorius by the Sixth General Council for heresy, we have a complete refutation of the claim so frequently urged by the Jesuits and other advocates of the papacy of the infallibility of the Pope. Till it is proved that two contraries can be exactly alike, this boasted claim of infallibility must be abandoned. Did you hear what the author said? This claim of infallibility must be abandoned. And let me tell you, this author is being very kind to the papacy. Not only should we abandon any pretended claim of infallibility by the papacy. We should outwardly proclaim the papacy as the Antichrist, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the vicar of Satan, head over the whore of Revelation chapter 17, and forbid any king on this earth to pay obeisance or obedience to this man of sin, else he be cast out of office forthwith. No civil power is the servant of God if it is the servant of his nemesis in Rome. The whole governments of all the world should be placed on notice. If you serve Antichrist, you cannot serve Christ, nor can you serve us. Does that make it pretty clear? Am I being too heavy-handed? Do you know that's exactly what the Protestant reformers of the 15th century said to their kings and rulers when they discovered, as have I, as have all Protestants throughout history, that the papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist? They overthrew their governments. We'll have no papist be king over us. We'll have no vicars of Satan to be king over us. And they overthrew their governments. They conformed their governments to Protestant governments. They passed godly laws. They gave godly liberties. And if you feel tyrannized today by your government, it's only because they serve the man of sin, not Christ. We need another Protestant Reformation, only this time we need a Protestant confirmation, being conformed to the image and likeness of his dear Son. Completely. Not just a half-baked effort by the Protestant reformers, but a complete confirmation. Let's not call it the Protestant Reformation. Let's call it the Protestant confirmation. The author says, till it is proved that two contraries or two opposites can be exactly alike, this boasted claim of infallibility must be abandoned. So evident is it that this fact is fatal to the papal infallibility that Baronius, the Romish annalist, a strong advocate of the same, has labored hard, though without the semblance of reason, to show that the name of Honorius was inserted in the decrees instead of that of some other person. In other words, they made a mistake when they condemned Honorius. Somebody said Pope Honorius when they meant somebody else. It's ridiculous on its face. He says, a supposition as weak and ridiculous as it is unfounded. The great body of Romish authors, and among the rest Dupin, completely admitted the heresy and condemnation of Honorius. The latter historian, Dupin, remarks that, quote, the council had as much reason to censure him as Sergius, Paulus, and Peter, and the other patriarchs of Constantinople, unquote, and adds in language yet more emphatic, quote, this will stand for certain, then, that Honorius, Pope Honorius, was condemned, and justly, too, as a heretic by the Sixth General Council. Okay? As I don't usually do this, but I'm going to stop and read a note in the bottom of this page. The author says, it is not uncommon in the present day in Protestant countries to represent the doctrine of papal infallibility as a Protestant calumny. In other words, a false accusation by the Protestants. We're going to cite official Roman Catholic decrees. He says, I will cite the opinion of one or two of their most celebrated advocates. The first being Louis Capensis. Here's what he said. He says, we can believe nothing. That is, we Roman Catholics can believe nothing if we do not believe with a divine faith that the Pope is the successor of Peter and infallible, unquote. Okay? So this is one of the great doctors of the Roman Catholic Church saying with his own pen that we Roman Catholics can believe nothing if we do not believe that the Pope is infallible. Okay? The whole Catholic Church depends upon your belief, the Roman Catholic belief that the papacy is infallible. Take away the Pope's infallibility, he's just another man, right? So the whole Roman Catholic Church revolves around the papacy as if he were Christ on earth, infallible and divine. This is the official statement of the Roman Catholic Church. Here's another example. He says, I shall quote the words of Cardinal Bellarmine. Now remember, Bellarmine is a Jesuit priest, one of the most celebrated doctors of the Roman Catholic Church, one of the most powerful Jesuits of all history. Here's what he said. Quote, but if the Pope should err by enjoining vices or prohibiting virtues, the Church, unless she would sin against conscience, would be bound to believe vices to be good and virtues to be evil, unquote. Okay? So the Jesuit priest Bellarmine says that if the Pope should enforce vices as virtues, we would obey him. And if he would condemn virtues as vices, we would obey him. In other words, if the Pope says that black is white, you will believe that black is white. And if the Pope says white is black, you will believe that white is black. Or you've fallen into apostasy. Cardinal Bellarmine, the most powerful Roman Catholic cardinal probably of history, officially, with his own pen, acknowledged the papal infallibility. Now, it's not just a calumny, a false accusation imposed upon the Roman Catholic Church by Protestants. No, we go on Roman Catholic authority that they demand service to the papacy as if he were inerrant, divine, and infallible. That is the Roman Catholic Church. It's no false accusation, as we clearly see from the great doctors of the Roman Catholic Church. It's the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church. But what does history tell us? What is the history that we just read? God's merciful hand demonstrating through the facts of history just how fallible the Antichrist is. Well said, right? Now, chapter 3, page 154, if you're following along. This has to do with image worship. Okay? Now, let me just use a word that the Bible uses, idolatry. And you've heard me say over and over and over that the Roman Catholic Church is the synagogue of Satan. It is the house of idolatry. Okay? This chapter has to do with image worship from the beginning of the great controversy on this subject, idolatry, to the death of the Emperor Leo and of Pope Gregory III, both in the same year, 741 A.D. So we're advancing from 606 A.D. to 741 A.D., and our history is going to record all the way until the coronation of Charlemagne, Charles the Great, in 800 A.D. So we're almost there. This is subsection 27. It begins, we have already seen on page 98 above that in the 4th century the worship of images was abominated by the Christian Church, and that even their admission into places of worship for whatever object was regarded by the most eminent bishops with abhorrence. Quote, in opposition to the authority of Scripture, there was a human image in the church. There was a human image in the Church of Jesus Christ, unquote, were the words of Epiphanius already quoted. All right? So here we have the words of Epiphanius supporting the biblical doctrine that there should be no images or idols in the house of God. He says again, quote, in opposition to the authority of Scripture, there was a human image in the Church of Jesus Christ, unquote. He's proclaiming that imagery is in opposition to the authority of Scripture. This is related all the way back to the second commandment. Thou shalt not make unto thyself any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in the heavens above and the earth beneath or the water under the earth, and thou shalt not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers unto the children, to the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy to the thousands of them that love me and keep my commandment. His commandment is that we are not to make nor to bow down and worship images and idols. You cannot worship the incorruptible God of heaven, the most glorious God of heaven, the creator of all heaven and earth, by a man-made image or object. To do so is to blaspheme his glory. All right? Christians in this century understood imagery and idolatry was the very sin that the Israelites fell into. And it was only the righteous kings of Israel who broke down those images and idols. We have demonstration after demonstration after demonstration in the Bible how God chastised his people for doing such a thing. And the Roman Catholic Church is the church of imagery and idolatry, as we know today. Here's another quote from Justin Martyr. Quote, "It is an injury to God," says Justin Martyr, "to make an image of him in base wood or stone." Unquote. In other words, it's an insult to God to reduce him to a man-made thing. But that's inferior even to the man that made it. It's understandable the disgust that God has with man-made images and idols. Man ought not to bow down and worship the makings of his own hands. Okay, this is the very sin that Israel fell into, right at the foot of Mount Sinai. They made a golden calf, and God's wrath was demonstrated. Why would anyone suspect or even hope that the Church of Imagery today, the Roman Catholic Church, has anything whatsoever to do with the God of the Bible? Now, Augustine says, this is one of the great doctors of the Roman Catholic Church, one of the early fathers of the Roman Catholic Church. So says the Roman Catholic Church. They always try to lay claim on famous Christians. Augustine says, quote, "God ought to be worshipped without an image. Images serving only to bring the deity into contempt," unquote. The same bishop elsewhere asserts that, quote, "it would be impious in a Christian to set up a corporeal image of God in a church, and that he would be thereby guilty of the sacrilege condemned by St. Paul. Children, keep you from idols." Isn't that what Paul said? Of turning the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like unto corruptible man, unquote. And here we have a quote from Origen, another claimed saint of the Roman Catholic Church. Quote, "We Christians," says Origen, "when writing against his infidel antagonist, that is, writing against Antichrist, quote, have nothing to do with images on account of the second commandment. The first thing we teach those who come to us is to despise idols and all images, it being the particular character of the Christian religion to raise our minds above images agreeably to the law of God himself has given to mankind," unquote. Okay? You ever hear the Roman Catholic Church quote Origen and try to assert that Origen was one of the great fathers of the Roman Catholic Church? Origen preached against imagery and idolatry. They never quote Origen when he speaks of imagery and idolatry, do they? He said it would be easy to multiply such quotations as these, but it is unnecessary. The testimony of these fathers is merely cited as historical evidence as to the state of the opinion on this subject in their day, not as a matter of authority, because were their testimony in favor of the practice of this popish idolatry, as it is of some other popish corruptions, still their authority would weigh nothing with genuine Protestants in favor of a practice so plainly opposed to the letter and to the spirit of the Bible. In other words, it doesn't matter who said it, whether it's Origen or any other of the so-called saints. They are not God. And we can take the good teachings of these early church quote-unquote fathers when they agree with the Scriptures, but when they do not, we are to discard them. Jesus is the rock and the foundation of the church, not Origen, not Justin Martyr, not any of the so-called fathers of the Roman Catholic Church. All right? Let's not make the same mistake of the papists and put a mere man at the head of the church. All right? Subsection 28. Some of the fathers, as Tertullian, Clemens, Alexandrinus, and Origen, carried their opposition to all sorts of images to such an extent as to teach that the Scriptures forbade altogether the arts of statuary and painting. Okay? Here's the assertion that these names, Tertullian, Clemens, Alexandrinus, and Origen, even opposed imagery and idolatry to the extent that they forbid art. That's how far they took it. Don't teach your kids in kindergarten to use crayons to make images and idols with crayons in the schools. That's how much they abhorred images and idols. Because they knew that if you teach little kids to make drawings with crayons in kindergarten, eventually one of them's going to try to make an image or an idol and call it God. That's how far they took the prohibition against imagery and idolatry. Some would teach today that we ought not to have cameras to take pictures of people, because someone might take a photograph of some saint of the Roman Catholic Church, someone who was eventually canonized as a saint, and take that photograph and blow it up as big as a wall in a room, and that people might bow down and worship it. Okay? Now, I don't let things get out of hand. We are not to make images and idols of anything in heaven above or the earth beneath or the water under the earth, and we are not to bow down and worship them. Okay? That's as far as I go, as far as the Scriptures go. I don't prohibit art, but I see the danger of art. That an innocent drawing or painting can eventually be idolized. And the caution of Tertullian, Clemens, Alexandrinus, and Origen is not lost with me. I understand the error of imagery and idolatry. And every image and idol, or every image and statue, is just making common that which can evolve into imagery and idolatry. Okay? I'm not preaching a new doctrine here. I'm just acknowledging the fear that imagery and idolatry will take place in the Church of Jesus Christ just like it did among the chosen people of God in Israel. But on the other hand, what we see in the Roman Catholic Church is a systematic refutation of the Second Commandment. They even take out the Second Commandment in the Roman Catholic Catechism, forbidding the making and bowing down and worshiping images and idols. Now, when they publish the Ten Commandments, it's there. But when they publish their catechism, they take out the Second Commandment. All right? The book of tutelage of the Roman Catholic Church called the Catechism, the second commandment is removed. And this is why you see in the Roman Catholic Church's imagery and idolatry of the prophets and the saints of Almighty God, and the Virgin Mary, and Jesus on a stick, and they all have kneelers before them, padded knee rests where you can place your knees when you bend over and bow down and worship these images and idols. Every Roman Catholic church, in the pews of their churches, when it comes time to pray, they reach forward and they grab the kneeler that is attached to the pew in front of them, and they pull it down, and they get down on their knees on these kneelers. You find the same kneelers in front of the images and idols of the Roman Catholic Church, so that you don't bruise your knees when you bow down and worship and pray to them. It is the church of imagery, the church of idolatry. It is the church of Antichrist. Okay? He says, some of the fathers, as Tertullian, Clemens, Alexandrinus, and Origen, carried their opposition to idolatry and all sorts of images to such an extent as to teach that the Scriptures forbid altogether the arts of statuary and painting. Now, the author says, while it is admitted that they were mistaken in their construction of the second commandment, for we are only forbidden to make graven images for the purpose of bowing down and worshiping them and serving them, according to Exodus chapter 20, verse 5. Yet the fact itself of their expression, such an opinion, is the most conclusive proof possible that they knew nothing whatever of the popish idolatry which sprung up a few centuries later and which continues to characterize the Church of Rome down to the very present time. Okay? So these great fathers of the Roman Catholic Church were absolutely opposed to any form of imagery and idolatry. Don't even sit down with your kindergartner and make crayon drawings of anything. They knew nothing whatsoever of what the Roman Catholic Church would become only a few centuries later, the very assemblage of imagery and idolatry. Quote, he says, the primitive Christians, remarks the historian Gibbon, who is more to be depended on for his facts than his reasoning, quote, were possessed with an unconquerable repugnance to the use and abuse of images, and this aversion may be ascribed to their descent from the Jews and their enmity of the Greeks. The Mosaic Law had severely proscribed all representations of the deity, and that precept was firmly established in the principles and practice of the chosen people. The wit of the Christian apologists was pointed against the foolish idolaters who had bowed before the worship of the making of their own hands. Okay? They had bowed before the workmanship of their own hands. The images of brass and of marble, which they had been endowed with a sense of motion, should have rather leapt from their pedestals to adore the creative power of the artists. Okay? The point is made, when a man makes an image or an idol and bows down and worship it, it would be more righteous for the man-made image and idol to jump down off of his pedestal and worship the man who made it. Point well taken. Listen, it's one of the great marks of Antichrist. The imagery and idolatry of the Roman Catholic Church is undeniable as a mark of the Antichrist. I'll see you tomorrow.